The ultrasound image was still warm in Camille's hands when the doctor stopped talking. She had walked into that appointment the same way she'd walked into every appointment for 7 years, holding her breath, gripping hope so tightly that her knuckles went pale against her warm brown skin, praying that this time would be different. This time. Finally, but Dr. Kwon wasn't smiling, that he was staring at something on the screen with that careful expression doctors practice, the one designed to give nothing away while the world behind their eyes is on fire. "Mrs. Choi," he said, very slowly. "How long have you believed this embryo was yours?" Camille laughed. Actually laughed, a short, nervous sound she did not mean to make. "Excuse me. The genetic markers." He set down his pen. "They don't match either you or your husband." The air in the room became something solid. Something she couldn't breathe through. "That's impossible. We did the transfer here. In this clinic. We watched it happen." Dr. Kwon folded his hands. The careful expression broke. "Mrs. Choi, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear." She didn't want to hear it. She wanted to go back 3 minutes, back to when she still believed her sister loved her, back to when she still believed her husband was faithful, back to before she understood that the two people she had given everything to had spent years quietly deciding she didn't deserve any of it. She didn't go back. She sat in that chair, in that white sterile room, and she let the truth come, and it was so much worse than she could have imagined. If you have ever sat in a room and felt the entire story of your life get rewritten in real time, stay with me. Subscribe to Domina's Corner right now, hit that notification bell, and drop "I'm staying" in the comments so I know you're here till the very end. Because this story goes all the way to the bone. 3 months earlier, Camille Pagosan Choi was the kind of woman other women watched when she walked into a room, not because she was performing. Because she wasn't. She was tall, warm-skinned, with a honey caramel complexion that deepened in summer and glowed in winter, and shoulder-length hair she kept pressed and neat because neatness was the first thing she'd given herself when everything else was chaos. She moved through the flagship Radiant location on Peachtree Street with the quiet authority of someone who had built something from nothing and never needed to announce it. 7 locations now. 43 employees. A wholesale contract renewed for the 3rd time last spring. She had started this business at 26 with $1,200, a storage unit, and a purchasing spreadsheet made on a library computer because she couldn't yet afford a laptop. She had spent the first year working 18-hour days and sleeping 6. She had spent the second year learning what she'd done wrong and fixing it. She had spent the 3rd year watching the business do what she had always believed it could. She called the chain Radiant because that was what she was building toward, not just a business, but a way of being in the world that said, "I see you, I made something for you, you are worth the quality I'm offering." People felt it. They came back. They brought their daughters and their sisters and their mothers. She had built all of it herself, and she had built it while fighting for a baby she couldn't seem to hold on to. 7 years of trying. 3 IVF cycles. 2 miscarriages. 5 years of what her friend Renee called the longest marathon a woman could run while standing completely still. The kind of pain that doesn't look like pain from the outside. The kind that requires you to smile at baby showers and coo over pregnancy announcements and fold yourself around someone else's joy when your own keeps slipping through your hands. She had done all of it. She had shown up for every bit of it. She had been the woman who did not let her grief become a burden others had to manage, but she had been so tired. "You okay, boss?" Renee asked from the doorway of the back office. Renee was Camille's oldest friend, head of operations for all 7 locations, and the only person on earth who could read Camille's silences the way other people read words. She was shorter than Camille, natural hair piled high, eyes that missed nothing and never pretended to. "I think I might actually be okay," Camille said. Renee crossed her arms. Looked at her carefully. Thursday is the transfer. Thursday. A pause. Renee's expression did something Camille didn't catch, a flicker, there and gone. And Vera's ready? Vera is more than ready. She's excited. Camille smiled. She's been talking about nursery colors. She already has opinions about the stroller. Renee nodded slowly. She said nothing else. Camille didn't notice the silence. She was already back in Hope, that small, terrifying place she had learned to be careful in. She had wrapped it up tight for so long. Protected it. But today she let herself breathe with it. Today felt like grace. Vera Pagosin walked into Camille's kitchen that evening like she owned it. Which was, in many small ways, how Vera had always moved through her sister's life. She was younger by 4 years, lighter in complexion, with natural hair she wore blown out and flowing, and a beauty she had always worn like armor. She dropped her bag on the counter without asking, opened the refrigerator without asking, and pulled out a sparkling water that wasn't hers. Dr. Kwan called, she announced. He says my uterine lining is ideal. His words. Ideal. I know. He called me too. Camille was chopping onions. There was something grounding about the act, the clean repetition, the smell, the way the knife hit the board. 3 more days. Vera leaned against the counter. Camille. Can you believe it? Not yet. She kept chopping. I'll believe it when I'm holding a baby. Don't do that. Don't protect yourself from it. This is going to work. Camille looked at her sister. Vera's face was open, warm, lit with the kind of conviction that had always been her gift, the ability to make you feel like she believed in you even when everything else said otherwise. It was magnetic. It was the thing that made people forgive Vera for things they would not forgive in someone less dazzling. This was what Camille loved most about her. This was also, as she would later understand, precisely what made Vera so dangerous. Vera Pagosin had always felt, in the private accounting of her life, that she had drawn the wrong card. Not because she lacked for anything objectively, she was beautiful, charismatic, adored by most people who met her. But she had spent 35 years measuring herself against her older sister and finding the gap not acceptable. She had tried 3 businesses. The hair braiding salon had lasted 14 months. The online accessory boutique had initial momentum and then hit the wall that every business eventually hits, requiring more than vision, requiring grind, requiring systems, requiring the particular patience of building something from nothing, and she had stepped back from it in ways that compounded until it quietly stopped existing. The wellness coaching practice had felt different, felt real, but building a client base required showing up in the same way on the days you felt called to it and the days you didn't, and she had found, when she examined her own willingness honestly, that she was better at starting than at sustaining. Camille had funded all 3. Partly, quietly, consistently, a soft loan here, a cleared invoice there, a conversation that ended with Camille's checkbook open because Vera's voice had gone quiet in the particular way it went when she needed something but hadn't quite asked for it yet. Vera loved her sister. This was true and it made the rest of it worse. She loved Camille with the complicated love of someone who had spent their whole life measuring themselves against a person who was never trying to be a measuring stick. She also resented her. In a place she didn't let herself look at directly. Not for anything specific. For everything general. For the stores, for the confidence, for the way Camille walked into a room and owned it without trying. For the fact that even the tragedy of infertility seemed, in Vera's terrible private accounting, like something Camille handled better than most people handled ordinary things. When she had made the offer at the dinner table, she had meant it completely. Every part of it. She had meant the sacrifice and the love and the desire to give her sister the one thing she couldn't give herself. What she had not examined, not then and not for months afterward, was whether the offer had arrived already entangled with something else. Whether the timing had anything to do with the fact that she had been sleeping with Choi Sang-hee for 3 months already, and she was looking for a way to stay close to two people she had decided she wanted. The surrogacy gave her a shape to do that in. She moved through the preparation months believing in both the sacrifice and the strategy simultaneously, in the way that people believe contradictory things when the contradiction is more comfortable than the truth. Sang-hee was late that night. Choi Sang-hee, successful attorney, the kind of Korean handsome that hit you in the chest and then stayed, arrived home at 9:15 with his jacket over his arm and a reason ready before Camille could ask for one. Kim's deposition ran long, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. I texted. He had. She'd seen it. She'd thought nothing of it. That he poured himself a glass of whiskey, asked about Thursday, said all the right things. He was good at that. He had always been good at filling a room with presence and warmth and the particular kind of attention that made you feel uniquely seen. It was the quality that had made him a brilliant attorney. It was the quality that had, Camille thought then, made him a good husband. Later she would understand it differently. When someone is skilled at making everyone feel uniquely seen, no one actually is. That he was 38 and had made partner at 34. He was known for being the kind of attorney who prepared so thoroughly that trials were almost formalities. He was known for his patience, his precision, and his ability to read what people needed to hear. The talent was not limited to professional use. That he had been unfaithful twice before Vera. He had ended both affairs himself, not from conscience but from risk assessment. The calculus of what he stood to lose had always outweighed the calculus of what he wanted in the moment. With Vera it was different, and that difference was the thing he had not been prepared for. Vera didn't need him to be careful. She was hungry for something she couldn't name, and so was he, and the first time had happened the way disasters happen, incrementally, and then all at once. That he had not planned what came after. That was the honest truth, and also the most damning thing about him, that a man capable of extraordinary strategic thought had let something this destructive proceed without a plan, and then built the plan only once it was too late to not need one. By the time Vera offered to carry Camille's baby, they had been sleeping together for 3 months. He had not told Vera to make the offer. But when she told him the night before the family dinner that she was going to suggest it, he had said nothing to stop her. He had sat with the whiskey in his hand and let the silence mean what it needed to mean. That was the first piece. Renee Bartholomew had known Camille for 22 years, since the semester they'd shared a dorm room and a very unpleasant radiator, and the particular intimacy that comes from being in close proximity to someone during their becoming. She was 3 inches shorter than Camille, with natural hair she kept in a high puff and eyes that missed nothing and never pretended to. She had worked with Camille through the early years of Radiant as a bookkeeper, then operations manager, now head of operations for the whole chain, not because Camille had given her a career out of loyalty but because Renee had earned it and both of them knew it, and that clarity was one of the foundations of their friendship. She loved Camille the way you love people you've watched build something from nothing. With admiration that doesn't require performance because it's rooted in evidence. She had also, across 22 years, developed a particular alertness to the things that moved around Camille's periphery. The things Camille didn't see because she was too busy being the most generous person in the room. She had formed her opinion of Sang-hee slowly and then decisively. He was charming, and she had never fully trusted charm. She had watched the particular way he managed Camille, the warmth that was always available when needed, the disappearances that were always explained, the attentiveness that showed up reliably in public and inconsistently in private. She had not had evidence. She had had a feeling that became a suspicion the evening of the family dinner when Vera made the offer and Sang-hee's face, for exactly 4 seconds, did something Renee saw and no one else caught, not surprise. Not emotion, assessment. She stored that moment. She didn't know yet what to do with it. She was patient. She had always been patient. She would know when the time came. The surrogacy offer had come 6 months before the transfer. At a family dinner. At this same table, Camille had just received the news that her third IVF cycle had failed. She was sitting very still in the way she did when something unbearable was happening, when the grief was too large for her body to hold and she was waiting for it to find a shape. The dinner had been Vera's idea. A Sunday meal at their parents' house, the kind of gathering that had anchored their family since childhood, the table full, the food generous, the conversation spilling across generations. Camille had almost cancelled. She had been sitting in her car in the clinic parking lot that morning staring at the test result on her phone, and the idea of sitting at a table full of people who would look at her and try to say the right thing had felt like more than she could manage. She had come anyway. Because she always came. Because being the one who showed up was written into her so deep she didn't know how to stop. So she sat at that table and held herself very still and ate what was put in front of her and answered questions about the stores when people asked about the stores and was, by every outward measure, fine. Vera had looked at her sister across the table for a long time. Then she said, "Let me carry the baby." Silence. "Vera," sang he started. "I mean it." She hadn't looked at him. She was looking at Camille. "My uterus is healthy. I've never had complications." And Camille, her voice went soft. "You're my sister. If I can be the thing that gives you what you've been trying for all this time, then I want to be that. I need to be that." Camille had cried. Not elegantly, not the cinematic kind. The real kind. The kind that comes from a place in your body that doesn't have a name. She had reached across the table and taken her sister's hand and said, "Are you sure?" And Vera said, "I have never been more sure of anything." Saying he had been quiet for the rest of the meal. Camille had thought it was emotion. The weight of the moment. The beauty of it. She would think about that quietness differently later. The months of preparation were filled with the particular emotional texture of something being built sacred. Camille and Vera went to every appointment together. The fertility specialist who would manage the synchronization. The reproductive attorney who drafted the gestational surrogacy agreement, a document that took 5 hours to discuss and that Camille's attorney reviewed 3 times. The psychological evaluation required by the clinic, where a quiet-voiced counselor asked both sisters questions designed to uncover complications and found, apparently, none. Camille threw herself into the preparation the way she threw herself into everything, completely, methodically, with the kind of focused love that looks like organization from the outside. She researched prenatal nutrition. She had detailed conversations with Vera about the boundaries of the arrangement. They talked at length, over coffee, and then over dinner and then over the phone late at night when Camille was too wound up to sleep. "Camille," Vera said one of those late nights. "I've got you. I want to do this. Can you let yourself believe that?" Camille was quiet for a moment. She was lying on her bedroom floor the way she sometimes did when she couldn't turn her brain off, looking at the ceiling. Saying he was asleep on the other side of the wall. "I'm trying," she said. "Try harder," Vera said, and laughed softly. Camille laughed too. She let herself. She did not know that 45 seconds after Vera ended the call, a text went to a different number, and that the exchange that followed existed in a parallel life Camille did not have the map to. What she knew was that her sister had said she'd got her. She chose to believe it. Renee came with Camille to one of the legal consultations. Afterward, in the parking lot, she stood beside the car for a moment without getting in. "What?" Camille asked. "Nothing." Then, quietly, "Has Sang-hee said anything to you? About having concerns? Reservations?" Camille looked at her friend. "Renee. Why?" "I don't know. Something. I don't know. She shook her head. Ignore me. I'm probably being paranoid. Camille got in the car. She decided Renee was being paranoid. Later she would wish she had asked the next question. The transfer happened on a Thursday morning in October. Camille had not slept the night before. She had lain beside Sang-hee in the dark and watched the ceiling and let herself feel the full terrifying weight of what the morning represented. 7 years. Every procedure. Every grief. Every morning she had gotten up and continued when continuing felt like the most unreasonable thing a person could be asked to do, and here was the morning. Here was the day she had been building toward. She dressed carefully. She chose a color she loved, a warm rust that made her complexion glow, because she wanted to wear something that felt like herself, like the fullest version of herself. On the day she was hoping to become a mother, Vera met her in the waiting room. She was already there when Camille arrived, sitting in one of the chairs with her hands folded in her lap and a calmness that looked, to Camille, like steadiness. Like strength. Like the version of her sister she had needed her to be. Ready? Vera said. No, Camille said honestly. But let's do it anyway. Vera smiled. She reached over and took Camille's hand. They held hands through the preparation. Through the room. Through the careful, precise work of Dr. Kwan and his team, who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who understood they were handling something that mattered beyond the medical. Camille held her sister's hand and watched the monitor and breathed and breathed and breathed. She watched the embryo, small, impossibly small, the distilled result of years and needles and hope and grief, transferred into her sister's body with the careful precision of a prayer. Then it was done. Then they waited. The 2-week wait was the most disciplined thing Camille had ever done. She did not catastrophize. She did not obsessively research symptoms. She went to work. She managed her stores. She had dinner with her parents and did not talk about it. She let herself be a person who was waiting for something and who had done everything she could do and who now simply had to wait. 2 weeks later, the test came back positive. Vera was pregnant. Camille stood in her bathroom with the phone pressed to her ear while Vera read her the results, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Uncomplicated joy. Clean. Unguarded. The kind of happiness that doesn't know yet what it costs. She called Sang-hee. He was in court. She left a voicemail, crying and laughing at the same time, not caring that the message sounded exactly like that he called back 2 hours later. It worked, he said. His voice was strange, a flatness underneath the warmth that she attributed to shock, to relief, to the weight of finally reaching something you've been reaching for. It worked, she said. Sang-hee. It worked. That's incredible, he said. Yes. That's incredible. That evening, he texted Vera. Camille didn't know that yet. The family dinner to celebrate was the most beautiful evening Camille could remember in years. Her parents came. Aunties. Cousins. Sang-hee's mother, who had flown in from Seoul and wept in a way that defied the language barrier entirely. Renee was there with her husband, steady and warm as always. Vera sat at the head of the table in a white dress, glowing, accepting the love in the room as though she had earned every bit of it. She had. Hadn't she? She was carrying her sister's baby. She was giving up her body for a year. She was making a sacrifice most people would never make. That was what Camille believed. That was what the room believed. That was what Vera believed they believed, and it was a fuel she had always needed, to be witnessed, to be praised, to occupy a space she felt was usually Camille's. What Vera had never said aloud, not even to herself in the dark of her own bedroom. She had offered to do this not entirely for her sister. She had offered because it was a way to become indispensable to 2 people she wanted. And because indispensable people don't get left behind. Saying he was different after the confirmation, and Camille noticed it the way you notice a shift in weather before the clouds come, a slight change in pressure, something you can't name but can feel that he was more interested in Vera's appointments than in Camille's preparation. He asked about Vera's symptoms, Vera's diet, Vera's prenatal supplements. He offered to drive Vera to checkups when Camille was working. He knew Vera's schedule, which days she had yoga, which evenings she cooked at home, which weekends she visited their parents, with a familiarity that should have been strange and wasn't, because she trusted him completely. One Sunday family lunch, sang he passed the jigi. His hand brushed Vera's. She reached for the bowl without looking at him. Something in the not looking was fluent. Practiced. The kind of unconscious behavior that belongs to people who have learned, carefully, not to react to each other in public. Renee caught it from across the table. She took a slow sip of her water. Set the glass down. Said nothing. After lunch she helped Camille in the kitchen. Through the window above the sink she watched Camille on the patio, laughing with her father about something, easy and warm and entirely, heartbreakingly, unaware. Renee. Saying he appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying a plate. His voice was easy. His face was easy. Did you need something? Just thinking, she said. That he smiled, set the plate on the counter, went back outside. Renee put the dish away. She had made a decision that evening she did not yet know how to act on. But the decision was made. She was going to watch until she was sure, and then she was going to tell Camille, and she was going to hold her friend's hand while the world rearranged itself. That it was not a decision she was happy about. She made it anyway. It was a Sunday afternoon in December when Renee found the text. She hadn't been looking. She was at Camille's house helping sort vendor invoices. She did this sometimes, stayed late, made Camille eat something, kept her grounded in the practical world while Camille's imagination built nurseries. Sanghee's phone was on the kitchen counter. It buzzed. The screen lit up, from V. Thursday same time. I missed you. 3 seconds. She read it in 3 seconds. Then Sanghi walked in, saw her near his phone, took it from the counter without any change in expression, pocketed it, and said, "More wine," as though the world was exactly as it had been 60 seconds before. "No thank you," Renee said. She went back to the invoices. Her hands were perfectly still. V could be a colleague. A client. An initial can belong to anyone, but she thought about the way he'd watched Vera across that Sunday dinner table. About the way Vera had stopped meeting Camille's eyes and the specific way people stop meeting eyes when they're editing the information their face would give away if left unmanaged. She waited until she was in her car, alone, to let herself feel it. She called her husband. "I'm coming home. I need to talk to you." "I'll be here," he said. He always heard her voice. She did not call Camille that night. She needed to be certain before she handed her friend a piece of information that would destroy the careful architecture of a life Camille had spent years building. She needed more. She was patient. She had always been patient. Over the next 2 weeks she watched the shared calendar Camille had given her access to for scheduling purposes. She cross-referenced Sanghee's unavailable markers against Vera's schedule. Over 6 weeks she found 11 dates where both of them had identical gaps. She went to Camille on a Tuesday. She shut the office door. She sat down and laid it out carefully, factually, without the conclusion she had already drawn, because Camille needed to arrive there herself. When she finished, the office was quiet. "That's not what it is," Camille said. "Camille, V is a common initial. He has female clients. He drives Vera to appointments because I'm at the store." She said it calmly. The voice of someone who has made a decision and is using words to protect it. "And Vera is carrying my baby." She would never do that to me. I hope you're right, Renee said quietly. I genuinely hope you're right. I am right. She picked up her phone. I have a vendor call in 10 minutes. Renee stood. Got to the door. Stopped. Camille, she said, without turning around. If something feels wrong, even for a second, call me first. Before you say anything to either of them. Call me first. A pause. Okay, Camille said. Renee left the office. She did not stop watching. Renee gave herself 2 weeks. She told herself she was being thorough. She was also, if she was honest, being afraid of what a wrong accusation would do to a 22-year friendship, afraid of the specific look that would cross Camille's face when she said it, afraid of the particular grief of watching someone you love come apart at the seams over information you delivered, but the fear didn't stop her. It had never stopped her. She started with the calendar. Camille had given her admin access to the family shared calendar 2 years ago, when coordinating deliveries and vendor meetings across 7 locations had become complicated enough to require visibility into everyone's schedule. Renee had used it professionally, without thought, the same way she used any operational tool. Now she used it differently. She went back 6 months. She printed every page. She laid them on her desk at home on a Saturday afternoon while her husband watched football in the other room, and she cross-referenced every date marked unavailable by Sang Hee against every date marked free by Vera. The correspondences were not occasional. They were consistent. Over 6 weeks of checking, she found 11 dates where both of them had identical gaps in their recorded schedules, not every week, not in a pattern obvious enough to be careless, but in a rhythm. The rhythm of 2 people who had learned to clear the same windows without ever writing each other's name in the same place. She sat with those 11 dates for a long time, then she went further. She thought about the things Sang Hee knew that he shouldn't know. The prenatal vitamin brand Vera had switched to in her 9th week. Camille had mentioned it casually, once, at a family dinner, and Sang Hee had known it already. The name of the midwife Vera had interviewed and decided against. Sang Hee had brought her up in conversation a week before Camille told him about the interview. Small things. The kind of things a man knows about a woman whose life he is paying close, private attention to. She thought about the afternoon she had stopped by Vera's apartment to drop off a gift, a book on prenatal yoga Camille had asked her to deliver, a small errand, 5 minutes. Vera had answered the door in a robe at 3 in the afternoon with her hair uncharacteristically loose and an expression that lasted only a second before the performance returned, a flicker of something that might have been alarm and was then immediately warmth, immediately charm, immediately the Vera that people were supposed to see. Renee had thought nothing of it at the time. She was always in a hurry. She had delivered the book and left. She thought about it now. She went to Camille on a Tuesday morning. She sat across from her in the back office of the flagship store and she laid it out, calmly, factually, everything she had assembled over 2 weeks of careful watching. She presented it the way she had been trained to think about evidence, not conclusions, just facts, in order, connected. When she finished, the office was quiet. The quiet lasted long enough to become a kind of presence. That's not what it is, Camille said. Camille, V is a common initial. She said it calmly. The voice of someone who has made a decision and is using words to protect it. He has female clients. Female colleagues. He drives Vera to appointments because I'm at the store. He knows about her vitamins because I told him about her vitamins. She stopped. Her voice didn't break. It just stopped, the way a machine stops when the current is interrupted. Then it started again. And Vera is carrying my baby. She is giving up her body for a year. She stopped again. She would never do that to me. I hope you're right, Renee said. I genuinely hope you're right. I am asking you to hope with both eyes open. I have my eyes open. Okay. Renee stood. She got to the door. She stopped. She turned halfway, not fully, just enough. Camille. If something feels wrong, even for a second, call me first. Before you say a word to either of them, call me first. A pause. Long enough to mean something. Okay, Camille said. Renee left the office. She walked to her own desk. She sat down. She was not done watching. She would not be done watching until she was wrong or until Camille called her. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked up a vendor invoice and tried to work. She could not work. She put the invoice down. She pulled up the calendar again. She looked at the 11 dates. She looked at them for a long time. Then she closed the laptop and went to make herself a cup of tea and stood in the small break room of the flagship store and looked out the window at the street below and thought, please let me be wrong. Please let me be wrong about this. Please let this be the first time in 42 years that my instincts are completely, spectacularly, blessedly wrong. The answer came 3 weeks later when Camille called her from the driveway of her own house, engine still running. With a voice so controlled it was almost unrecognizable. She was not wrong. What broke through was not a dramatic discovery. It was a surprise visit. Camille had cleared her calendar to attend Vera's prenatal checkup unannounced. She wanted to show up the way a mother shows up, quietly, just present. She had a key to Vera's apartment. She let herself in at 10:15 on a Friday morning. The apartment was empty. Vera's car was gone. Her coat was gone. The prenatal vitamins that lived on the kitchen counter in a neat row were missing from their spot. Camille called. Voicemail. She sat down on Vera's couch. She told herself, Vera went early. Already at the clinic. This is nothing. She called the clinic. The receptionist, young, not the usual one, said, without meaning to give anything away, "Oh, Mrs. Choi. Your husband's already there with her. They arrived about 20 minutes ago." The phone felt very heavy. "Of course," Camille said. "Thank you." She sat on Vera's couch for another 8 minutes. She looked at the kitchen. At the vitamins. At the coffee cup by the sink that had 2 mugs worth of grounds in it. 2 people had made coffee here this morning. She walked to her car. She drove to the clinic and parked across the street and sat there with the engine running and told herself a version of events in which this still made sense. She watched the entrance for 12 minutes, saying he came out first. He held the door. Vera came through it. They stood on the sidewalk and his hand went to the small of her back. Briefly, 2 seconds, 3, moving there with the easy confidence of something that had done this before. A nurse appeared behind them and he stepped away, casual, unhurried, like a man who had nothing to step away from. Vera said something that made him laugh. He looked at her in a specific way. Camille had been the recipient of that look. She had treasured it. She put the car in reverse. She drove home. She sat in the driveway for 45 minutes. She did not go inside. When she finally went in, she picked up her phone. She called Renee. "What do you need me to do?" she said. Camille was methodical by nature. She had built Radian not on inspiration alone but on spreadsheets and timelines and the patient assembly of the right information before making the right move. She approached what was happening to her marriage the same way she would approach a failing inventory system, with precision, without emotion in the work phase, with documentation. She made a list. She went back through everything she could access legally, the family shared calendar, their joint credit card statements, the location history on the family iPad. She screenshotted. She organized. She printed. She laid it all out on the large table in the back office of the flagship store on a Saturday when no staff were in, with the door locked and a cup of coffee gone cold at her elbow, and she looked at the assembled picture of her life for a long time. The credit card statements were careful. Saying he was careful, she understood this about him now, the way you understand new information about a familiar object seen in different light. Small charges. Nothing out of pattern. He had been a lawyer long enough to know how financial evidence looked and to make sure his didn't look like any, but the calendar was less careful. The calendar was a domestic instrument and he had not thought of it as a legal instrument, which was the first place his discipline had failed. He was careful with money because he thought like an attorney about money. He was less careful with time because he thought like a husband about time, which is to say, he assumed he was trusted. He assumed the calendar was just the calendar and not a record of the architecture of two separate lives running inside one. She also pulled the location history on the family iPad. Not her phone, not his. He had disabled sharing on his phone months ago, she realized now, which had seemed like a privacy preference and was something else entirely. But the iPad sat on the kitchen counter for recipes and news and the occasional FaceTime with his mother, and it had shared location turned on and neither of them had thought to change it. She went back as far as the history allowed, she cross-referenced, she was precise. She did not jump to conclusions. She held herself to the standard she would hold anyone in a business negotiation: show me the evidence, not the inference. Show me the fact, not the feeling. The facts assembled quietly and with terrible patience into something she could no longer argue away. She hired Davina. Davina came to the office in a gray suit and an expression of professional calm that Camille found immediately steadying. She was a former police detective, mid-50s, with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have been in rooms with very bad things and learned not to waste energy on the theatrical. "How long do you want me to run the observation?" Davina asked. "Until you have something undeniable," Camille said. "I don't want interpretation. I want documentation." "The gestational carrier, she's a family member." "My sister." A pause. Not a long one. Davina had heard everything before. "Then I'll be thorough," she said. "Yes," Camille said. "Please." Davina left. Camille went back to work. She was still making Sanghee's coffee. She was still asking about his cases. She was still, to anyone watching, the same woman who had always been there. The stable one. The successful one. The wife who held things together. She had decided, she was invisible until she wasn't. She was gathering until she was ready. She was not going to let either of them see her coming. It was the most controlled and deliberate thing she had ever done, at the moment of the worst grief of her life. She filed that away quietly for later. Davina came back 11 days later. She set the folder on Camille's desk without comment. Camille opened it. Hotel check-in records. 12 months of them, different hotels, nothing that would create an obvious pattern. A restaurant in Buckhead where they had spent 2 hours on a Thursday evening when he was supposed to be in court and she was supposed to be at prenatal yoga. Photographs from a parking garage, not intimate, just the proximity of two people who have become each other's gravity. "How long?" Camille asked. "The earliest verifiable evidence is 14 months, Davina said. "I believe it began before that, but I can only document what I can document." 14 months, Vera had offered to be her surrogate 11 months ago. The math was immediate and brutal. "The offer was made 3 months into the affair," Camille said quietly. "It appears so." She closed the folder. She put her hands flat on the desk. She breathed. "I need to understand the medical timeline now," she said. "The conception dates. Can you help me access what I'm legally entitled to as the commissioning parent? Yes, Davina said. I can help you navigate that. Then let's do that next. Camille walked to the window. She looked at the city, the neighborhood she had built something in. I don't have enough yet. What I have is an affair. What I need is the whole picture. Then we keep going, Davina said. Yes, Camille said. We keep going. The medical specialist worked from a downtown office with a view of the highway and the quiet of someone who had spent 21 years reviewing reproductive medicine records in legal contexts. His name was Dr. Fairbanks. He went through the documentation Camille had assembled, the clinic records obtained under her rights as commissioning parent, the timeline, the transfer dates. He asked 2 questions. He made 3 notes. He sat back. Mrs. Choi, he said carefully, the gestational indicators in this documentation are inconsistent with a pregnancy resulting from a transfer on the date specified. The gestational age suggests a conception that occurred prior to the transfer date. I want to be precise, this is an indicator, not a conclusion. The conclusion requires genetic testing. The gestational carrier would need to consent to genetic testing, Camille said. He nodded. She won't consent, Camille said. A pause. He looked at her steadily. Then you'll need a different route to definitive evidence. Yes. I know. She was already working on the route. The sample was obtained through channels her attorney confirmed were legal and documentable. The DNA test was processed by a forensic laboratory. The results came back on a Thursday morning in a plain white envelope that Camille carried to her office and set on the desk and looked at for 4 minutes before she opened it. The baby was Sanghee's biological child, Vera was the biological mother. There was no genetic contribution from Camille in the pregnancy. The embryo she had watched transferred on that October morning, with her whole desperate heart open, with years of grief and hope concentrated into that single procedure. That embryo had not resulted in this pregnancy. It had failed. Immediately. In ways that should have been communicated to her and weren't, and Vera had already been pregnant when the transfer was performed. The pregnancy had occurred naturally. In one of those hotels or in Vera's apartment with the 2 mugs of coffee and the vitamins on the counter. And someone, the clinic, Sanghee, Vera, some combination of complicit silence, had let Camille believe the transfer had worked. Had let her plan and dream and love a baby she didn't know wasn't hers. She sat with that 7 years. Every appointment. Every grief. Every morning she had taken the injections and prayed in the dark of the bedroom with Sanghee asleep beside her. This time, she did not cry. She picked up her phone. It's time, she told Renee. This is the moment that breaks me every time. Because Camille had given everything, to both of these people. And the most painful part isn't even the betrayal. It's that she was sitting in that office defending them with the last of her trust, and they had already decided who she was to them, a resource. A stepping stone. A life to be taken apart and reassembled in their favor. Comment, Camille deserved better. If this is landing in your chest right now. Subscribe to Domina's Corner. Like this video. We go this deep every single time. The inheritance document told her what she needed to know about the shape of everything. She found it in Sanghee's home office in a folder she would have had no reason to access except that she was now a woman with reasons to access everything. She read it with the methodical patience of someone who has built a business on understanding what documents mean. What it meant was, they had been waiting. The plan, in its architecture, was patient and elegant, the kind of planning that has a lawyer's fingerprints on it, that has been walked through slowly and adjusted over time. If Sanghee could establish the baby as his biological child outside the surrogacy framework, and if the genetic testing revealed no contribution from Camille, and if the surrogacy agreement could be challenged on the grounds of the clinic's failure to disclose the failed transfer, then Camille's legal standing as a parent would be weakened. Saying he would have biological parental rights. In a divorce proceeding, with careful management of the timeline and the assets, and with Vera's testimony as the biological mother, he could position himself as the aggrieved party, that he could put Radiant in the property settlement discussions, that he could, with the right attorney and the right documents and the right timing, walk away with enough to reshape his life entirely, with Vera and the child he'd helped create. While Camille was left to argue for what was already hers, this was not passion. This was not recklessness. This was strategy. Years of it, patient and careful, built alongside a marriage and a fertility journey and every act of love that Camille had poured into both of them. She sat with the document in her hands for a long time. She thought about the woman who had started this with $1,200 and a spreadsheet on a library computer. She thought about what that woman deserved. She picked up her phone. She made 4 calls. The first was to Mona, her attorney. Begin restructuring the business assets immediately. Tonight. I'll explain everything tomorrow. But tonight I need certain assets restructured. I'll have associates on it in the hour. The second call was to her accountant. The third was to the bank holding her personal investment accounts. The fourth was to Renee. This wasn't an affair, she said when Renee answered. This was a plan. Silence on the line. Then, how bad? Bad enough. But I'm ahead of it. I need your help with one more thing. Name it. The anniversary dinner for my parents. I need you to help me plan it. Another silence. Longer this time. And then Renee said, I'll bring wine. She made him dinner that night. His favorite. She stood at the stove and made doenjang jjigae the way his mother had taught her in the early years of their marriage, when Camille had learned everything she could about the food and the language and the customs of his family, because she had loved him, and loving him had meant wanting to love the things that made him who he was. The fermented soybean paste. The tofu cut the way he liked. The careful seasoning. She set the table. She lit the small candle they'd bought at a market in Seoul on their honeymoon, and she had carried home wrapped in her clothes and never used except on ordinary evenings when she wanted the table to feel special. She sat across from him and watched him eat and asked about his week. That he talked. Animated, a property dispute that interested him architecturally, a client whose case had taken a turn. He gestured with his chopsticks and laughed at his own analysis and looked at her across the candlelight with the full warmth of his attention. She looked back and thought, you have been sitting at this table in the light of the candle I carried from Seoul, eating food I learned to make for you, and the entire time you were planning to take everything I built. She said, I think I finally got the seasoning right. He said it was perfect. She smiled. After dinner he pressed a kiss to the top of her head and went to his study. She waited. Then she picked up her phone and called Mona and began the final phase. She chose her parents' anniversary dinner not for cruelty but for precision. She needed witnesses. She needed both families in one room, because what she was about to reveal would not stay contained, and she intended to be the one who controlled the shape of the truth when it first entered the world. She also needed, and this she did not tell anyone, not even Renee, to have her parents there. She needed the people who had loved her first, before she was successful or capable of anything. She needed to stand in a room with the people who had made her. 18 people. Both families. Sang-hee's mother from Seoul. Sang-hee's younger brother. Camille's aunties and cousins. Vera in a cream dress, heavily pregnant, seated at the table accepting congratulations from aunties who kept patting her belly and telling her she was glowing. Renee and her husband at the far end of the table. Camille arrived in a green dress the color of late summer moss. She was perfectly composed. She hugged her aunties and complimented the food and bent to kiss her father's cheek and sat beside her husband and reached for his hand under the table and he pressed it and turned to speak to his brother, and his smile was so practiced and so perfect that she understood, finally, why it had taken her so long to see through it. Some performances are too polished to look like performances. Her father stood to give the toast. He spoke about 42 years of choosing each other, about the difference between love as a feeling and love as a practice. He cried. He always cried at these things. His voice was the same voice that had told young Camille she could build anything if she was willing to build it right. When he sat down, Camille stood up. The table expected her to add to the toast. She saw it on their faces, the expectant smiles, the slight leaning forward. Even Sang-hee looked up with an expression of warm, practiced readiness. She placed the tablet on the table. She pressed play. Sang-hee's voice filled the dining room her mother had set with good china and candles. It was the recorded conversation from his study, the one about the inheritance restructure, the one in which he had said things about the surrogacy arrangement that contradicted the legal agreement he had signed. The room went still by the 5th second. She let it play for 90 seconds. Then she paused it. "I need everyone to stay with me for a few minutes," she said. Her voice was even. She had practiced it in the car driving over. "What I'm about to share is going to be hard to hear. I need you to hear it from me, together, so we're all starting from the same truth." "Camille," Sang-hee started. "Please don't." She looked at him. Not with anger, with the absolute absence of illusion. "I will say everything. Then you can speak." He closed his mouth. She laid it out, the affair. The duration. The photographs from Davina's investigation, placed on the table without drama, the way you place evidence. The timeline. The shared calendar analysis. The prenatal records. The DNA results. Each piece arriving after the last in the way that good documentation always arrives, in order, undeniable, building. The room came apart around her. Her mother's hands went over her mouth. Her father stood up. Sat back down. Sang-hee's mother went gray in a way that made her look 10 years older in 60 seconds. Sang-hee's brother stood from his chair. Vera sat completely still in her cream dress with her hands in her lap and did not look at anyone. When Camille placed the final document on the table, the inheritance plan, Sang-hee's handwriting at the top, the words inheritance restructure, the silence that came before the next eruption was the most absolute thing in the room. "Vera," Camille said. She looked at her sister. "Look at me." Vera looked up slowly. "I want you to know that I don't hate you," Camille said. "I understand, in some way I cannot fully explain, why you are the way you are. I understand that you spent your whole life feeling like I had something you deserved and couldn't reach. I understand that." She paused. "And I need you to hear this very clearly. My understanding of your pain does not make what you did acceptable. Both things are true." Vera opened her mouth. "Sit down, Vera," said their mother. Vera sat down. "This was not a love affair," Camille said, looking at Sang-hee. "This was a plan. They intended to use this child to challenge the surrogacy agreement, compromise my legal standing, and proceed through a divorce that would put my business assets in play." She held his gaze. "You married a woman who had already built her own life. And instead of being grateful for that, you decided to take it." The silence that followed was the largest thing in the room. Sang-hee said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had built the room and closed it perfectly. Renee, at the far end of the table, took a slow sip of her wine. "I need you to pause right here. Pause and breathe. Because what we just uncovered, this wasn't passion. This was predatory. These two people looked at a woman who loved them, who funded them, who grieved with them, who tried to build a family with them, and they decided she was a resource to extract from. Comment, they calculated everything. If this is making your blood run cold. Subscribe to Domina's Corner if you want stories that go all the way to the bone. Stay, because Camille is not done yet. There was a particular kind of silence that came after a storm that Camille had never fully understood until now. Not the silence of nothing, the silence of aftermath. The silence of a world that has been rearranged and hasn't yet figured out what it sounds like in its new configuration. She moved through the weeks after the dinner in that silence. People called. Of course they called. Her aunts, who had been at the table and needed to process it with someone. Cousins who heard from the aunts. Sang-hee's brother, once, whose voice when she answered was small and careful, the voice of a man trying to reconcile two versions of someone he believed he knew. He said he was sorry. He said it plainly, without decoration, and she believed him and told him so, and that was the end of the call. Sang-hee's mother sent a letter. Handwritten, in Korean, which Camille had translated. 2 pages. It expressed shame and sorrow and a love for Camille that the woman had apparently carried for 11 years of the marriage and had never found the right words for. It ended with a single line the translator rendered as, "You deserved better from my son, and I am sorry I did not see what I should have seen." Camille read it 3 times. Then she wrote back. She wrote that she had loved being part of the family and that she held no anger toward anyone who had not chosen this. She said she hoped they would remain in each other's lives in whatever way was possible. She meant it. The divorce proceedings took 4 months. Sang-hee's firm placed him on administrative leave within 5 days of the dinner. The details had traveled fast, both families had phones, and the combination of the audio recording and the documentation meant that the story circulated with the momentum of something already confirmed. His professional reputation, built on precision and integrity, was damaged in the way that only a discovered gap between public image and private behavior can damage it, not from the outside, but from within. His attorney made contact through Camille's attorney twice. She declined to respond directly. The business assets were clean, the restructuring had been completed before the dinner. Everything that was Camille's alone was documented as hers. Radiant, all 7 locations, the wholesale contracts, the brand she had built from the floor up, was not negotiable. In the end, Sang-hee signed. He signed because the alternative was a trial in which the audio recording would be played in a courtroom, the photographs entered as evidence, the DNA results on record, and the inheritance plan document examined by a judge. No attorney worth the name advises a client to go to trial with that exposure. Mona called on a Tuesday afternoon. "It's done," she said. "Thank you, Mona." Camille was at the flagship store, reviewing a promotional calendar with her marketing manager. She ended the call, put her phone face down on the table. "Everything okay?" her marketing manager asked. "Yes," she said. "Go ahead, I'm with you." They went back to the promotional calendar. She did not feel the dramatic catharsis that the end of a marriage is supposed to produce. She felt a clean and quiet finality. The feeling you get when a door you have been holding open for a long time, because you kept believing someone might still come through it, has finally, gently, closed. People called. Of course they called. Her aunts, who had been at the table and needed to process it with someone. Cousins who had heard from the aunts. Sang-hee's brother, once, whose voice when she answered was small and careful, the voice of a man trying to reconcile 2 versions of someone he had believed he knew. He said he was sorry. He said it plainly, without decoration, and she believed him and told him so, and that was the end of the call. Sang-hee's mother sent a handwritten letter in Korean, 2 pages. Camille had it translated with the same care she brought to any document that mattered. It expressed shame and sorrow and a love for Camille that the woman had apparently carried for 11 years of the marriage and had never found the right words for. It ended with a single line the translator rendered as, "You deserved better from my son, and I am sorry I did not see what I should have seen." Camille read it 3 times. Then she wrote back. She wrote in English and had the letter translated into Korean and sent it. She said that she had loved being part of the family and that she held no anger toward anyone who had not chosen this. She said she hoped they would remain in each other's lives in whatever way the future allowed. She meant every word. About 3 weeks after the dinner, Renee came over on a Wednesday evening with a bottle of wine and nothing else, no agenda, no topic, just herself. They sat on Camille's apartment floor with the wine and the lamp on and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of it for a while. And then Renee said, quietly, "I want to ask you something." "Ask." "Do you wish you had seen it sooner?" Camille thought about it. She had thought about it before, at 3 in the morning, in the specific inventory of regret that the mind undertakes when it is not being actively directed. She had asked herself whether there had been signs she should have caught years before Renee brought her the calendar analysis and the text message. Whether there had been a version of herself, less willing to give benefit of the doubt, less committed to the practice of trust, who would have caught it 2 years earlier. Free. "Sometimes," she said. "And then I think about who I would have had to be not to miss it. I would have had to be a woman who looked at her sister offering to carry her baby and first thought, what does she want from this? I would have had to be someone who greets love with suspicion." She turned her wine glass slowly. "I don't actually want to be that person. Even now." Renee looked at her. "I don't want what happened to me to make me someone who can't receive something generously," Camille said. "That's what they would have actually taken. If I become someone who can't trust, who can't love without the exit strategy ready, that's the real theft." She paused. "I'd rather learn to choose better who I trust than to stop trusting." Renee was quiet for a moment. "That's the most Camille thing you've ever said." Camille laughed. "A genuine one. Is that good or bad?" "It's entirely you," Renee said. "And it's good." They finished the wine. They talked about ordinary things, the new location, a travel podcast Renee had gotten into, Renee's daughter who was about to start high school and what that was doing to Renee's sense of time. They talked about ordinary things the way people do when they have been through something large together and the only thing left to do is return to the ordinary and find that it is still there, still good, still sufficient. That it was after midnight when Renee left. Camille stood in the apartment after the door closed and felt the quiet of it. Her quiet. Her apartment. Her terracotta walls and her reading chair and the lamp still on by the window. She was 40 years old. She was standing in a space she had built herself, after the wreckage of a life she had built partly for other people, and the feeling of standing in it was the closest thing to a foundation she had felt in years. She was building on it. She was going to keep building. Vera had the baby in April. A girl. 8 pounds, 2 ounces. Camille received the news from her mother in a phone call that lasted 4 minutes, her mother trying to navigate the particular delicacy of announcing that a grandchild had arrived who existed at the intersection of betrayal and innocence. "She's healthy," Camille's mother said. "Good," Camille said. "I'm glad she's healthy." She was. She meant it completely. The child had done nothing wrong. The child had arrived into wreckage she had not built and could not be blamed for. Camille sent a card. She did not go to the hospital, she was not ready for the hospital. The grief of the motherhood she had spent 7 years reaching for, taken in a way so specifically designed to wound, needed time before she could look at it directly. She gave herself the time, Her apartment was in a building she had chosen herself. She furnished it gradually, deliberately, with things she liked. She painted the living room a deep warm terracotta that Sang he had once said was too intense. She bought the reading chair she had been thinking about since before they were married. She put the candle from Seoul on the windowsill where it caught the evening light. She was not happy in the way the end of a crisis promises happiness. She was free, which was different, and she was finding more useful. She woke at 5 the morning after the family dinner and lay in the quiet of the apartment and listened to the city begin. Traffic somewhere below. A garbage truck. The particular pre-dawn silence that is not actually silence but the absence of human intention. She had not cried the night before. She had cried once, briefly, at 3 in the morning, the kind of crying that has no sound to it, just the body doing what the body does when grief finally finds its way through all the careful management and insists on being felt. It lasted 6 minutes. She timed it without meaning to, because she was that kind of person. Then it was over and she was still there. The apartment was still there. The city outside was still running its machinery. She was still alive. She was still herself. That was not nothing. That was, she thought in the gray of 5 in the morning, actually quite a lot. She got up. She made coffee. She stood at the window with the mug warming both hands and watched the sky shift from black to the specific dark blue that belongs to the last 30 minutes before dawn. She had always been better at beginning than at holding on. She had spent years believing that holding on was strength and beginning again was failure. She understood now that she had been wrong. Holding on had been the habit of someone afraid of the cost of letting go. And beginning again was not failure. It was what she did. It was, in fact, what she had always done best. Renee called at 7. How are you? No preamble. I slept a little. Cried for 6 minutes at 3. 6 minutes. You timed it. I timed it. A sound on Renee's end, affectionate, quiet. I'll come by. I'll bring the almond pastries. She arrived at 8. They sat at the kitchen table and ate and talked about ordinary things. A staffing question at the Midtown location. A vendor slow with a renewal. Renee's daughter who was about to start high school and what that was doing to Renee's sense of time. Ordinary things. Camille let them be ordinary. She let the morning be a morning. She let herself eat a pastry and look out the window and be in the world without the weight of everything she was no longer fighting to save. It was the first morning in years she was not fighting anything, she was just here. Later that week she had lunch with her mother at the restaurant they always went to when something important needed saying. Her mother sat across the table and looked at her daughter with the full weight of a love that required no performance. Tell me how you are, she said. Really? Camille thought about it. She had been giving careful answers for weeks. She looked at her mother's face and decided to give the true one. I'm sad, she said. More sad than I expected. I thought I would feel relieved, and I do feel some relief. But mostly I'm sad. Her mother nodded. I'm sad about the baby. 7 years. All of it. And then the way it ended, the way I found out. She stopped. Breathed. I'm still processing that. Of course you are. And I'm sad about Vera. Not in the way I expected. Not angry the way I thought I would be. I'm sad about who she actually is versus who I needed her to be. I think I spent 35 years deciding what she was and ignoring the evidence when she showed me something different. She reached for her water glass. That's partly on me. You loved her, her mother said. I did. I do. In whatever way you love someone who can't receive it without turning it into something else. She paused. I kept giving her more rope and calling it faith. Her mother reached across the table and put her hand over Camille's. She didn't say anything. She just held her daughter's hand in the way that means, I was here before all of this and I will be here after, and nothing that happened changes what you are. Camille looked at the table. She let herself be held. Your father wants you to come to dinner Sunday, her mother said, after a moment. He won't ask directly because he doesn't want to put pressure. But he wants you there. Camille smiled. Tell him I'll come. Come hungry. He's been cooking all week. She laughed. A real one. Tell him I'll eat everything. She drove home from the lunch feeling something she hadn't felt in a while, held. Not by a marriage or a plan or a version of a future she'd been building toward. Just held by the people who had loved her first and would love her last, whose love had never required anything from her except that she show up. On Sunday she went to her parents' house and sat at the kitchen table and ate more food than she'd eaten in weeks and laughed at her father's stories and watched her parents move around each other in the kitchen with the practiced ease of 42 years. This is what it looks like, she thought. When it's real. When it lasts. This is what it looks like. She called a therapist. Not reluctantly, not as a last resort, but as the act of someone who had decided that understanding what had happened to her was worth the work it would require. The therapist was named Dr. Addison, and she worked from an office with a single plant on the windowsill and the quality of listening that Camille associated with someone who had been trained to hear what was not being said as much as what was. In their second session, Dr. Addison asked, when you think about the surrogacy offer, Vera's offer, what was the first feeling? Before the analysis. Before you knew what you know now. Camille thought about it. Really thought. Relief, she said. It felt like being saved. By your sister. Yes. And when someone saves you, what does that mean about them? A pause. A long one. It means they're good, Camille said slowly. It means they're on your side. It means you owe them something. Owe them what? Your trust, she said finally. Complete trust. Because how could someone who was saving you be anything other than exactly what they looked like? And if you had wondered about that, Dr. Addison said, if you had let yourself question the offer, then I would have had to question the rescue, Camille said. And I needed the rescue. I needed it so much that I couldn't afford to question the rescuer. She looked at the plant on the windowsill. It was a pothose, the kind of plant that grows in any direction available to it, finding its own path along whatever surface is nearest. She had always thought of pothose as optimistic. I made it easy, she said. Not by being weak. By being so desperate for something good that I couldn't let myself look carefully at where it was coming from. That's not a character flaw, Dr. Addison said. That's grief doing what grief does. When you've been in pain long enough, you reach for relief without checking whether it's real. What do you want to build from here? Dr. Addison asked in a later session. Not what you need to recover from. What you want to build. Camille drove home thinking about that question. It stayed with her through dinner and through the evening. It was still there when she sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a piece of paper and wrote it at the top of the page, what do I want to build? She sat with it for a long time. Not performing patience, actually being patient. The way she had learned to be patient with a difficult vendor or a complicated negotiation, sitting with the discomfort of not yet knowing the answer, trusting that the answer would come if she didn't force it. Then, slowly, she began to write. She wanted to travel. Places she chose, at her own pace, for her own reasons. She had been to Seoul twice with Sang-hee, on his terms, at the speed of his nostalgia. She wanted to go somewhere that had nothing to do with anyone else's history, she wanted to learn to cook something completely new. Not to please anyone. Not because a mother-in-law had taught her or a husband had preferences she was honoring. Just because the act of learning a new skill, of moving her hands through something unfamiliar and making it gradually familiar, was one of the quiet pleasures she had let slide in the years of building and grieving and managing. She wanted to take Sundays. Real Sundays, where she read something long and sat somewhere quiet, a park, a cafe, her own chair by the window, and let her mind do what it naturally did when she stopped directing it. She had forgotten what her mind did when she stopped directing it. She was curious, she wanted, eventually, to think about what family meant now that the shape of it had changed. Not urgently. Not with the grinding need that had driven her toward IVF and surrogacy and the particular desperation of wanting something so much that you stop asking whether you are building toward it wisely. But eventually. With patience. With the calm of someone who had learned that wanting something does not mean it must be obtained immediately and at any cost, she wrote it all down. She looked at the list. It was shorter than she expected. But each item on it was entirely, completely, only hers. No one's approval required. No one's schedule to coordinate around. No one's preferences to absorb into her own until she couldn't tell them apart. She folded the paper and put it in the drawer of the side table. She went to bed. She slept. Vera called once. Camille let it ring. Then she answered. Vera's voice was different. The performance had come out of it. She sounded like what she actually was, a woman who had done a terrible thing and was standing in the rubble of it. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. Camille said nothing. I just need you to know, I didn't think about what it would do to you. I didn't let myself think about it. I know, Camille said. Camille, Vera. I think that's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. That you didn't think about what it would do to me. Because you never did. Every time you came to me needing something, you didn't think about what it cost me. You believed I owed you. You believed my life was an insult to your potential, and you spent 20 years taking from me to balance a ledger that only existed in your head. Vera was quiet. The baby is innocent, Camille said. I want nothing but good for that child. But I can't have you in my life. Not now. Maybe not ever. I'm not saying this in anger. I'm saying it because it's true. She ended the call. The last conversation between the sisters happened 6 weeks after the dinner, at Vera's apartment. Not because Camille owed it, but because she had one more thing to say and she wanted to say it in person, which was how she had always done the things that mattered. Vera opened the door. She was large now, the pregnancy heavy, and her face had the specific tiredness that belongs to people living in the consequences of what they built. She looked at her sister and said nothing. I'm not here to fight, Camille said. I know. I need you to hear one thing. And then I'll go. Vera waited. You used to say that I always had everything. That you were always the one left out. That life gave me things and skipped you. Camille looked at her steadily. I heard that every time. I carried it. I spent years trying to share what I had with you because I believed that if I just gave enough, you would eventually feel like enough. Vera's jaw tightened. But Vera. I worked for everything I have. I worked when I was scared and when I was broke and when I was alone and when I was grieving a baby I couldn't hold. I got up and I built things because that is what I chose to do. You had the same hours in the day. You had the same capacity. You had more resources than most people because I gave them to you. She paused. And what you built with them was a plan to take what I'd already built. Vera said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, The same words she had said her whole life, the same words that had been her excuse and her wound and her identity all at once. You always had everything. No, Camille said. I had discipline. And I used it. She looked at her sister one last time, really looked, the way you look at a face you've known your whole life and are about to stop seeing regularly. The girl who had shared her bedroom. Who had held her hand at their grandfather's funeral. Who had called her crying at 3 in the morning over heartbreaks. Who had sat across the table and offered something that turned out to be a different kind of taking entirely. She looked. Then she walked back to her car. She did not look back. There was one more thing she needed to sit with, and she had been circling it for months the way you circle something important enough to approach carefully, the question of what motherhood meant now. She had spent 7 years building toward it. The entire fertility journey, the IVF cycles, the miscarriages, the hope and the grief and the offering that had turned out to be something else entirely, all of it had been in service of that one destination. She was 40 years old. That destination had not been reached. The question was, did she still want it? She sat with it without rushing it, without forcing it into a shape that felt resolved before it was. Some mornings it felt like grief, the specific acute grief of the road not taken. She let that grief be real. She did not argue with it or tell it to be practical or remind herself that she had other things to be grateful for. She let it exist alongside the other things. Other mornings it felt different. Not absence but openness. The particular quality of a future that has not yet been written. She was 40. She was healthy. She had resources and stability and the kind of life that could hold a child well if she chose that. She had options she had not let herself look at for years. She had been so committed to the specific path, to the particular dream of a biological child through the particular mechanism that had felt, for 7 years, like the only way. Now she looked. She looked with the calm curiosity of someone exploring a map she had never fully opened. There were children in the world who needed a family. There were different ways of becoming a mother. There were paths she had not considered because she had been so committed to the one path that had ultimately been closed by other people's choices. She was not committed to that path anymore. She was open. That openness was not the same as peace. It was not the resolution of the grief. It was something that lived alongside the grief and did not require the grief to finish before it could begin. She was learning to live alongside things rather than waiting for them to resolve. She was learning that some things do not resolve, they integrate. They become part of the landscape of yourself. The grief of the miscarriages, the grief of the 7 years, the grief of the child she had believed was coming, these were not going to disappear. They were going to become part of what she carried, legitimately and without shame. She was a woman who had gone through something hard. She was also a woman who was building an 8th store and learning to cook for pleasure and sleeping through the night and laughing at things that struck her as funny. Both things were true. She went to New Orleans in June. For days, alone, on purpose. She had been to the city twice before, once for a conference, once in transit, and had never seen it properly because she had always been on someone else's schedule. She stayed in a hotel she chose herself, in the French Quarter, with a wrought iron balcony that looked out over a street that seemed to function on an entirely different relationship to time than Atlanta. She ate at restaurants she found by walking until something appealed to her. She went to a jazz club on a Thursday night and sat at a small table and ordered a glass of wine and listened to something being played with the kind of full commitment that reminds you what music is actually for, that it exists not to be heard in the background but to be entered, the way you enter a room that has been lit specifically for you. She sat in that room for 3 hours. She felt, at some point in the second hour, something she had not felt in a long time. Not happiness as relief, not happiness as the absence of pain. Happiness as presence. The specific uncomplicated happiness of being in a place she had chosen, at a time she had chosen, with no one's needs directing the evening except her own, she thought, sitting there with the music and the wine and the particular warmth of a room full of people who had all come for the same thing. This is what I was protecting. All those years I was working so hard to protect the life I was building, this capacity. This specific ability to sit in a room and feel good just because I am here. To need nothing more than what is happening right now, saying he and Vera had tried to take that. They had not succeeded. She came home on a Sunday evening and stood in the kitchen of her apartment and felt the quality of the space. The terracotta wall. The chair. The candle. The thing she had chosen. She was home, her home. She was building a life that was entirely, only, specifically hers. Not the life she had planned. Not the life she had wanted 10 years ago or 5 years ago or even 1 year ago. Smaller in some ways and larger in others and profoundly, unmistakably, real, she was going to be fine, she already was. 6 months later, Camille Pogossin stood outside the 8th location on the morning it opened. She stood on the sidewalk in a cream linen blazer and watched the city move around her, the traffic, the people, the ordinary extraordinary motion of a world that continues regardless. The store window behind her bore a sign she had ordered herself, in a font she had chosen herself, on a night when she sat alone in the apartment and thought about what this one would be called. The sign didn't say Radiant that it said Camille's. She had decided on the name in the apartment one evening, painting the terracotta walls alone, when a song she liked came on and she thought about it for a long time. Radiant was the name she had chosen at 26 for a vision of what she could build, of the light she believed she was working toward. It was a beautiful name. It belonged to who she had been, the woman who believed that if she gave enough warmth, enough loyalty, enough love, the world would handle the rest gently. That woman had been extraordinary. She had built something real and lasting from almost nothing. She deserved to be honored, but she was not the woman standing on this sidewalk in November. This one was just her name. Because she was done building under anyone else's influence. Because she had earned the right to put her own name on the thing she was building. Because she wanted, when she drove past it in 20 years, to see her own name on that corner and feel what it meant to have built it after everything. Renee pulled up and parked and came to stand beside her. They stood together in the way that old friends stand, in a silence that holds everything and requires nothing. Vendor meeting at 10, Renee said. I know. New location proposal is on your desk. I know. Renee looked at her sideways. How are you, actually? Camille thought about it. Actually considered the question. I think, she said, I'm finally asking myself what I want. Not what I can save. Not what I can hold together. What I actually want. And what do you want? Camille looked at the store. Looked at the morning. Looked at the city she had refused to be defeated by every time it tried. More of this, she said simply. More of building things that are mine. She walked inside, the lights came on, the first customer arrived at 7:43 and was a woman about her age who looked around the store with the expression of someone who had just found something she had been looking for a while, and said to no one in particular, finally. Camille heard it from behind the counter. She smiled and thought, yes. Finally, the staff arrived. The morning began. The ordinary business of the day unfolded with the quiet efficiency of a well-built operation, and Camille moved through it the way she always had, present, attentive, in possession of herself, and somewhere around 9 o'clock, standing in the back room reviewing an inventory printout with a cup of coffee she had made herself in a morning that belonged entirely to her, she felt something settle, not resolution. Not the triumphant closure that stories are supposed to produce. Something simpler and more durable. The feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do, as exactly the person she actually was. She had lost her husband. She had lost the version of her sister she had invented. She had lost years of hope and the particular grief that belongs to the motherhood she had been building toward. She had lost the careful story she had told herself about the people who loved her and what that love was worth. She had not lost herself. The hardest thing she had ever lost wasn't her husband. It wasn't the baby she had planned for. It was the version of her sister she had held in her mind for 35 years, loyal, generous, capable of sacrificing for love. That Vera had been built out of Camille's own desire and had never existed outside of it. Letting go of that story was the most necessary thing she had ever done. And the most painful. And the most clarifying. Its place was something truer. Smaller and quieter and more real. The knowledge of what she could trust and who had earned it. The knowledge of her own capacity, not just to build businesses, but to survive the specific cruelty of being loved badly by people who should have loved her well, and to emerge from it still herself. Still generous. Still capable of grace, still building. She had let it go. The morning light came through the new windows of Camille's, her store, her name on the glass, her vision on that corner, and it was the same light it had always been, and it was enough. It was entirely enough. And that is where we leave Camille, not where she started, not where she was broken, but exactly where she chose to begin again. She built something real. She loved people who didn't deserve the quality of love she gave them. She survived. And when it was over, she did not become someone smaller or harder or more afraid. She became someone who knew, finally, completely, without anyone's permission, exactly what she was worth. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, if it reminded you that your loyalty is not weakness and your love is not a debt someone else gets to collect, then subscribe to Domina's Corner right now. Hit that notification bell. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and in the comments, I want to know, have you ever loved someone so completely that their betrayal rewrote your whole past? Write, Camille, in the comments and let's talk about it. We go this deep every single week here at Domina's Corner, and I will see you in the very next one.